Welcome to In Defense of the Revolution, a Cuba Solidarity podcast from a Canadian perspective. My name is Cam Scott, and I'm here with Samantha Hislop. As I'm sure every listener knows, the U.S. escalations against Cuba, the total blockade to prevent any fuel from reaching the island, continues. It's a time of emergency for Cuba, and it's a time of emergency for the solidarity movements. Now, an important lifeline for Cuba is tourism, as we've previously discussed, and it seems that amid shortages of jet fuel and possibly political pressure, Air Canada, WestJet, Canadian airlines have ended flights to Cuba, and this is going to have further impacts. It's a confusing moment, but I thought that we could check in on that today. What is the situation right now as you understand it, Samantha?
Yeah, so I believe it was on Sunday night, just 3 days ago, there were reports that the Cuban Airport Authority in Havana notified other airport authorities in other countries through the international system. They issued a NOTAM that there was a shortage of jet fuel, and temporarily they would be suspending refueling. So that means that other international carriers that are flying into Cuba wouldn't be able to refuel. They'd have to make other arrangements. So there's different impacts depending on the distance of the flight. Obviously, for example, flying from Toronto to Varadero is like a 3 and a bit hour flight. So you don't necessarily need to refuel. But if it's like a long haul overseas, coming from, say, Moscow or Western Europe or something, they have more needs with refueling. So I believe it's not unprecedented. What they usually do is they'll make technical stops in nearby destinations, like in Dominican Republic or Mexico. If they need to top up to complete the round trip or head wherever they're going, they'll just make a quick stop nearby and they'll refuel. So that came out, I believe, late Sunday night. And immediately we woke up to the news from Air Canada that they were canceling all flights and packages, vacation packages to Cuba until May 1st. So they wasted no time in canceling the entire Canadian tourist season to Cuba. On the other hand, WestJet Sunwing, WestJet owns Sunwing now, they issued a statement on Monday morning saying that they would make adjustments where needed to refuel, and they were going to maintain the sales of flights and vacation packages to Cuba for Canadians. And Air Transat actually had the most reassuring memo that they issued that morning as well, saying that they were committed to continuing the service to Cuba, that everything was staying as it is. If you've got a booked flight or vacation package, it's still going. They did introduce a flexibility policy just to, cater to any Canadians who maybe wanted to hold off or change their dates of their vacation. But it was only Air Canada that abruptly and immediately canceled the whole season. It should be noted too that Air Canada was flying smaller planes than the other carriers, which don't carry as much fuel in the first place. So the explanation from Air Canada, I guess, seemed to make more sense when it first came out. I've flown with all of those airlines to Cuba. And for sure, like Air Transat, they use much larger planes, so they can carry a lot more fuel. So less of an issue for them. So that was Monday morning. And then suddenly around 4 or 5 p.m., a reversal from WestJet Sunwing. They also canceled from that point on, canceled sales of flights and vacation packages to Cuba until April 30th. And then later in the evening, much later on 9 p.m., Air Transat also reversed their business decision and canceled the entire season. So all the Canadian airlines canceled their flights to Cuba until at least May 1st. The only country where this has happened. So for Canadian tourists that currently are in Cuba, the airlines were sending empty planes down and bringing those people home early, which I find kind of odd.
And eerie, yeah.
So I think there's still more flights coming back with Canadian tourists, but at the same time, you have tourists arriving from other European countries, from Spain, from Mexico and Latin America, from Russia. By and large, there haven't really been any major disruptions with any of the other airlines from other countries to Cuba, and they've just adjusted to the situation. Cuba's alert that they issued about the shortage of jet fuel, they said they would be impacted until close to the end of February. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of that, to be honest. It seems very peculiar to me that most of our Canadian airlines intended to continue their services. And I could see, if you follow the travel groups, the Cuba hotel groups, all the airline, if you were reading everything online, most people were still pretty intent on taking their vacations. They wanted to support the Cuban economy and the Cuban people. They had friends and family they wanted to visit. And Canadians on the ground in Cuba right now are saying everything is okay. We had no issues. We don't feel that we needed to come home early. This is kind of strange. Our vacation was cut short, and they're being quite alarmist about it and not really saying much, or it just doesn't add up. So the Canadian tourist market brings in multiple $billion each year into the Cuban economy. It's a vital part of the Cuban economy. There's going to be mass layoffs probably in Veradero. I'm sure it's already happened. So people will be out of work because there's no Canadian tourists for the peak season. They were hoping to welcome, I think, over 1 million Canadian tourists this year and try to get back close up to those levels that we had pre-2020. They were ready to do that. And even when I was there just a week and a half ago, I noticed that from last year, they made a lot of improvements. You could tell with supplies, things on the ground were just smoother. Transportation was smoother. It was more organized. I think they strengthened supply chains because they've really been trying to grow the Canadian tourism market to get it back to the levels it was at pre-pandemic. So this is a very devastating economic blow to Cuba at a horrible time. And I just feel like I have a lot of questions about why this is happening, because there are many Canadians, actually we've seen since these airline cancellations an even greater surge in support of initiatives to support the Cuban people right now, asking our government to send humanitarian aid and send oil to Cuba. And people want to go to Cuba. Some people are even still saying, well, I'm still going to go. I got my refund from WestJet or whatever, and now I'm going to go through Mexico, and I'll just connect through Mexico, through Aeromexico or another airline, and I'll get to Cuba that way. So
yeah, I was surprised to see a really nice article, which isn't always the case in the Winnipeg Free Press, that featured a lot of very calm and considerate accounts from Canadian tourists in Cuba who are in Veradero right now, I hope still enjoying their vacation. And they said that the hospitality is great and that things are more or less uninterrupted. They seemed unperturbed. And shout out to Tyler Searle for writing such uneven-handed piece of reporting when so much of the media has succumbed to anti-Cuban narratives and panic, and in this way have been participant in what I'm going to go ahead and call, because of the peculiarities of the situation in the case that you just sketched, a capital strike by Canada's airline duopoly. I think that there's political pressure here because there are alternative routes, as you've noted, places to refuel. You think about Panama. I needn't enumerate them. As we're talking about these airline monopolies that are bailed out every so often without conditions. You mentioned Aeromexico. That's a state-owned airline, and this should already be the case with Air Canada. As it is, I think that they limit foreign investment to remain a Canadian company, but BlackRock and other U.S. capitals have a stake. So I've always wondered how that interacts with the terms of the U.S. blockade. There's surely some political pressure here because it's not a logistical necessity. There's a great piece by Isaac Saney on this very topic. There are readily available alternative fueling arrangements, and these other routes are going to persist. There are enough undaunted people that are going to keep going to Cuba. This, to me, feels like, as I said, a capital strike, and it reminds me, in the very fierce oratory of Miguel Diaz-Canel, on numerous occasions he's pointed up the abdication of responsibility, or conversely, the responsibility, the share of responsibility for this crisis that the media should bear, because they have helped to distort the actuality of the situation. And they have, in a sense, covered up and downplayed the U.S. blockade and made this seem like it were a question of mismanagement or a simple natural disaster. Worse, some media outlets accuse corruption and are really working overtime to choke off popular support for Cuba.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that all the coverage of these interruptions to tourism are so vicious, but it's hurting Cuba. We've talked about the necessity of tourism for Cuba and the risks that accompany that approach, which the Cuban government understands very well. So it's an economic necessity, but I think it has political benefits to the Cuban Revolution, because if you go to Cuba and you experience the hospitality firsthand, I believe that you will be friendlier to Cuba. You will leave with a different perspective, and you will be less susceptible to these narratives once you return to the belly of the beast, as it were. They're trying to isolate Cuba from even fair weather friends seeking fairer weather. A lot of Canadians go there in the winter. This is peak tourist season, and that contributes to the economic wounding. I think it's strategic.
Yeah.
I don't want to speculate too much about that. But the political response has been poor as well. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that.
I think so. There are a few NDP members of Parliament that are speaking out about this. I did see Elizabeth May from the Green Party make a statement online, against the U.S. sanctions and the blockade of oil. But it's mainly a couple of NDP members of Parliament. The first one was Don Davies, who's the current leader of the NDP. And he questioned Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand, who just met with Marco Rubio last week and was quite cozy with him. Was basically pressing her to say, what's going on here? These sanctions are collective punishment against the Cuban people. It's going to cause a humanitarian disaster. What is Canada going to do about this to step in and assist the Cuban people to help get them through this? He talked about U.S. imperialism as well. He did a good job. He called it out. So his concern was the people of Cuba, and their lack of ability to acquire oil right now for the function of their country, and the other secondary effects, which will be, terrible, with more medicine and more food shortages and all kinds of other issues that could come of this. Saying, what is Canada going to do? What are you going to say, and what are you going to do? Suggesting that we send aid. And Anita Anand completely avoided everything he said. And her response basically was that Canada is doing everything it can to get Canadian tourists back to Canada from Cuba safely as quickly as possible. So she completely avoided his questions and the real question, and the root of the issue. She didn't want to touch it. She didn't want to comment on it. And she used also that moment to, again, make it look like Cuba is unsafe, it's unsecure, and we need to get Canadians out of there as soon as possible, which is not the case at all. As every Canadian that has returned or is waiting to get on an early flight back right now is saying, I don't want to leave. I don't see any reason to leave. I'm here to have a vacation, or I'm here to visit my friends. I'm helping someone out. I'm here to support them. I want to be here. Why are they taking us home early? It's not a disaster. It's not unsafe. There's no chaos. There's no instability. But she's talking like, already like, imminent collapse. We have to get Canadians out of there. That was her response. So completely dishonest, avoided the issue, and very cowardly. She's a coward. But kudos to Don Davies for bringing that up. And then Alexandre Boulris, another NDP member of Parliament, who's also the sponsor of the parliamentary petition. What is it? 7082?
It's E7082. And there will no doubt be more by the time that this podcast publishes. But right now, there's more than 6,000 signatures on this.
Yeah. So we're getting literally hundreds of Canadians signing onto this petition, demanding the government of Canada to condemn this blockade of Cuba, make sure that we're not complying with U.S. sanctions or enabling this disaster that the U.S. is trying to create in Cuba, and also demanding that we strengthen our ties and trade with Cuba in energy and oil and agriculture and medicine and pharmaceuticals and all those areas where we can have a mutually beneficial relationship. Cuba has a lot to offer Canada, and we have ways that we can help them too right now. So that's what the petition is about. And since all these airlines have just canceled the Canadian season, we're seeing more Canadians sign that petition. They're enraged. They're dumbfounded. Like, what is going on? You're shutting us out of Cuba. Like, you're cutting off. You're cutting those ties. It feels like. So people are really upset. So the NDP does seem to be taking this up. And then I saw today, so I assume it was today, Senator Yan-Pao Wu asked the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade. He asked them, this oil blockade from the U.S., it has the potential to cause a humanitarian crisis in Cuba. It's, I can't remember his words, but basically he was saying it's totally illegal and immoral and wrong, and Canada should be doing something. We should be sending aid right now. What are you doing to send help to Cuba right now? And the speakers on the Committee of Foreign Affairs and International Trade were kind of just talking in circles, saying, vaguely saying, well, we work through the UN and other multilateral agencies to send aid to Cuba. And he was like, but what are you doing now? What are you sending anything? He had to ask like maybe 3 times, and they kind of finally admitted, well, no, right now, no, there's nothing going to Cuba. Kind of like we're kind of gonna wait and see. So in other words, we're too cowardly to probably piss off the United States or whatever, and we're just gonna wait. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But when people start dying, maybe we'll reconsider. Kind of answer. It was really pathetic. They were stuttering. They were shaking. Like they knew how wrong they were, but that was their answer, which was a non-answer essentially.
And now Canada has sent out a travel advisory. The government of Canada has advised that people avoid non-essential travel, and they've upgraded the risk level of Cuba. They're saying avoid non-essential travel to Cuba due to worsening shortages of fuel, electricity, and basic necessities, including food, water, and medicine, which can also affect resorts. Now, the resorts have strategic reserves. They often have their own power sources, but this, again, is not so much about a realistic assessment of the situation. It has more to do with Canada's fear-mongering, the government of Canada's fear-mongering, and their attempts to isolate Cuba in a moment of dire need. I think that even travel experts are quite surprised by this.
There was a message from the Board of Tourism in Canada, their office in Toronto, and basically they were baffled and they were shocked and heartbroken about the decision by all Canadian airlines to stop the service to Cuba. And they released a memo yesterday afternoon, I think, basically saying thank you so much to all Canadians who love Cuba. Thank you for traveling to Cuba. It was a long statement. I can't really, it's hard to paraphrase all of it. It was nice. It was very nice. They're really sad, and it's going to have a profound impact on the economy in Cuba and all the businesses, all the sectors that revenue flows through. But they said, we're ready to welcome you back, anytime, because they don't really know what's going on either. It must be so difficult for them to, because this really came out of left field.
Yeah, it's a terrible surprise to many people, and I think we may as well include ourselves in this, that have these relationships and that quite closely monitor Canada-Cuba relations. But what is important now is that we stand with the people of Cuba. This means going to Canadian Network on Cuba.ca and finding a solidarity group in your city. It means joining the Day of Action on February 21st. It means going to the House of Commons website and signing the petition and sharing it with everyone you have ever met.
That's right. Sign petition 7082. If you're a citizen or resident of Canada, please sign the petition.
El día primero aquel, lleno de emoción y ruido, alguien dijo conmovido y feliz, gracias Fidel. Y el pueblo después de un año repite, gracias Fidel. Y el pueblo después de un año repite.